Hello and welcome. You're welcome to comment your city and the time below. I always enjoy reading them. If you find these stories interesting, please consider subscribing. Let's start tonight's story. I took the job because it was easy money and because I needed to get away from the city for a while. That's what I told myself when I answered the ad, at least. Caretaker needed for private property. Remote location, minimal duties, competitive pay. The listing made it sound like a paid vacation, a chance to think, to breathe, to stop checking my phone every 30 seconds like my life depended on the next notification. The man who hired me, Mr. Garrett, though I only ever heard his voice through phone calls that crackled with poor reception, explained that he'd recently purchased an old summer camp deep in the woods, about 40 miles outside of Millbrook. The sale was moving through some complicated legal channels, something about previous owners and disputed land boundaries, and he needed someone to watch the place until everything cleared. "Just keep vandals out," he said. "Check the buildings for damage. Take photos if anything looks wrong. Report back once a week. No guests, no staff. No responsibilities beyond existing there and making sure the property didn't fall apart or get stripped by copper thieves." He offered me $1,200 a week plus provisions delivered every Thursday. I'd have the whole place to myself. I said yes before he'd even finished describing the accommodations. The drive up took longer than I expected. The highway gave way to state routes, then to county roads that narrowed with each turn, until I was following a gravel path through forest so thick the afternoon sunlight barely penetrated. The trees pressed close on both sides, mostly pine and birch, their trunks wrapped in creeping vines that looked like they'd been winning a very slow war against the bark. When I finally reached the camp, my first thought was how perfectly it matched the word abandoned. The sign at the entrance, Camp Pinewood, established 1978, hung crooked from a wooden arch, one side of the lettering bleached white by decades of sun, the other side dark with rot. Beyond it, the road opened into a clearing where the main lodge sat like a tired old dog, its porch sagging, its windows clouded with grime. To the left, I could see the lake through the trees. It was larger than I'd imagined, stretching out smooth and gray under the overcast sky. What struck me immediately was how still it looked. Unnaturally still. The wind moved through the trees around me, rustling leaves and bending branches. But the surface of the lake remained glassy and undisturbed, like it existed in a separate weather system. The cabins lined the far side of the clearing, maybe a dozen of them, arranged in a loose semicircle facing the water. They were small, single-room structures with peeling paint and shingled roofs spotted with moss. Their windows were dark. Their doors were closed. They looked like they'd been waiting a very long time for children who never came back. I parked near the lodge and sat in my car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, taking in the details. The playground equipment was half swallowed by weeds. A rusted swing set with only one swing remaining. A merry-go-round tilted at an angle, its platform buckled. The flagpole near the dining hall stood bare, its rope slapping rhythmically against the metal in the breeze. A sound like a slow, irregular heartbeat. Everything felt suspended. Not peaceful. Suspended. Like a photograph of a place rather than the place itself. Mr. Garrett hadn't met me in person. He'd told me the keys would be in a lockbox attached to the lodge's side door, the combination texted to my phone. I found it easily enough, a heavy brass lock that opened with a metallic clunk. Inside were 3 keys on a ring, one for the lodge, one labeled dining hall, and one marked dock gate in faded permanent marker. Before I could even get the door open, my phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Garrett, brief and oddly formal. "Settled in yet? Call when you can. 1. Important rule." I called. He picked up on the first ring, which surprised me. "Everything looks all right?" he asked. His voice sounded strained, like he was forcing casualness. "Yeah, seems fine, quiet." "Good, good. Listen, there's one thing I need you to do, and it's non-negotiable." He paused, and I heard him take a breath. "Do not leave the main lodge after dark. I don't care what you hear or what you think you see. Stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait for morning, understood?" I laughed, just a short breath of amusement because the way he said it felt theatrical, like he was playing up the spooky abandoned camp angle. "Sure, no problem." "I'm serious," he said, and the edge in his voice killed my smile. "This isn't a joke. Stay in the lodge at night, that's the only thing I'm asking." "Okay," I said. "I understand." He hung up without saying goodbye. I unlocked the lodge and stepped inside into air that smelled like old, pine cleaner and damp wood, like someone had tried very hard to make the place smell welcoming and then left before finishing the job. The interior was larger than it looked from outside, a big common room with a stone fireplace at one end, mismatched furniture arranged in conversation circles that no one would ever use, and walls covered in faded camp posters. Smiling cartoon animals holding canoe paddles. Safety slogans in cheerful fonts. "Swim with a buddy." "Leave no trace." "Always whistle before crossing the trail." The kitchen sat off to one side, visible through a serving window cut into the wall. I walked over and found it cleaner than I'd expected, the counters wiped down, the old gas stove functional looking. Someone had left supplies, canned goods, bottled water, and a loaf of bread that would go stale in a few days. And then I saw it. On the counter, pinned under a cracked plastic magnet shaped like a cartoon fish, there was a piece of paper. Lined notebook, paper, the kind with the 3 holes punched on the side, slightly yellowed. The title was written across the top in neat block letters. "If you're reading this, you're the new Night Watch." I picked it up slowly, feeling a strange prickle of unease move down my spine. The rules were numbered, 1 through 8, but the handwriting changed halfway down the page. The first 4 were written carefully, almost formally in blue ink. The last 4 were scrawled in black pen, the letters pressing hard into the paper, some words underlined multiple times. I read them once quickly, my brain trying to process them as a joke. Then I read them again, slower. "Lock the dock gate before sunset. If it is open after dark, do not close it. If you hear a whistle, do not whistle back. Do not count the cabins at night. The number changes when you look. If the dining hall lights come on by themselves, stay in the lodge and turn off every light you can reach. If someone knocks and says they are a counselor, ask them which color their lanyard is. If they answer anything but yellow, do not open the door. If you see tracks leading to the lake after dark, do not follow them. The lake is not a path. If you see someone you know wearing a counselor shirt, do not speak to them first. Make them speak to you, and listen for what they get wrong. Remember this, the camp does not like adults who act like children." At the bottom of the page, beneath the last rule, someone had written one more sentence. It was underlined so hard that his pen had torn through the paper in 2 places. "The camp does not like adults who act like children." I set the paper down carefully, as if it might do something if I moved too quickly. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat had picked up, thumping against my ribs in a way that felt unreasonable. I laughed once softly because the alternative was taking it seriously, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. It felt like a prank, a tradition maybe, something the previous caretaker left behind to mess with whoever came next. Spooky rules for the spooky abandoned camp. But as I looked around the empty lodge, at the faded posters and the dusty furniture and the windows that showed nothing but trees and gray sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had written these rules the way a person writes a warning on a prescription bottle. Not to scare you, to keep you alive. I spent the first evening doing exactly what I was hired to do. Normal tasks, methodical, grounded, reassuring tasks. I walked the perimeter of the lodge, checking door frames for rot and testing window latches. I photographed the broken pane in the common room's east-facing window, the cracked spider webbing across the glass like frozen lightning. I tested the radio Mr. Garrett had left on the front desk, an old two-way receiver with a coiled antenna, and confirmed that it worked, though the static was thick and the signal weak. I made a list of visible damage missing. Shingles on cabin 7, graffiti on the side of the dining hall, just a faded tag years old, and fallen tree branch blocking the path to the boat shed. It was boring work, calming work, the kind of work that made the rules on the kitchen counter feel even more ridiculous. At around 6:30, with the sun starting to sink behind the tree line and the air cooling fast, I remembered the first rule. Lock the dock gate before sunset. I grabbed the keys and headed down the path toward the lake. The ground was soft underfoot, layered with pine needles and decomposing leaves, and the air smelled like earth and cold water. The path curved through a section of forest where the trees grew so close their branches tangled overhead, creating a tunnel of shadows. When I came out the other side, the lake opened up in front of me, wide and gray and perfectly impossibly still. The dock extended maybe 30 feet from the shore, its wooden planks dark with age and moisture. At the end of the dock, stood a simple gate, just a waist-high chain-link barrier with a latch, the kind meant to keep kids from running straight off the end into deep water. It wasn't locked. The latch hung loose, the gate slightly ajar, swaying just barely in the wind. I walked out onto the dock, my footsteps hollow against the wood, and pulled the gate shut. The latch clicked into place. I locked it with the key, testing it twice to make sure it held. The lake was quiet. The woods behind me were peaceful for a moment, the wind settling, the distant call of a bird fading into silence. I stood there longer than I needed to, looking out over the water. The surface reflected the darkening sky like a mirror, and I found myself thinking about what Mr. Garrett had said on the phone. Do not leave the main lodge after dark. It felt excessive now, standing here in the calm, ordinary dusk. This was just a lake, just an old camp, just trees and cabins and empty buildings. I turned and walked back up the path, the keys jingling in my pocket. By the time I got back to the lodge, the sun had dropped below the horizon and the woods had gone from gray to dark blue. I locked the front door behind me, made coffee in the small kitchen, and tried to settle in. I'd brought a book, but I couldn't focus on it. My eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the shapes of trees outside, to the dark gaps between the cabins. At some point, maybe an hour after full dark, I saw movement through the window. Just a flicker, a pale line near the lake visible between the trees. I set down my coffee and moved closer to the glass, squinting into the darkness. The dock gate was open. I stared at it, my mind briefly refusing to process what I was seeing. I'd locked it. I'd tested it twice. The lock had been solid, the latch secure, but the gate was open now, swinging gently, the chain link catching the faint moonlight. The rule came back to me immediately, sharp and clear. If it is open after dark, do not close. Yet I stood there, frozen, arguing with myself in the silence of the lodge. Wind couldn't do that, not with the lock. Animals couldn't work a latch. There was no one else here. No one else had access to the dock, and yet the gate was open. I backed away from the window slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears, and forced myself to sit down at the kitchen table. I picked up the rules again, reading the first one over and over, trying to find a loophole, a clarification, anything that would let me go back down there and fix it. If it is open after dark, do not close it. Why? What happens if you close it? I didn't have an answer, and I wasn't going to find out. I stayed at the table, staring at my hands, trying to rationalize. Maybe the lock was faulty, maybe I hadn't secured it properly. Maybe. A sound came across the water, not a splash, not a fish jumping or a branch falling. A soft, rhythmic tapping like knuckles rapping against wood. Deliberate, patient, the sound carried across the lake with unnatural clarity, cutting through the stillness. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from underneath the dock. I felt my stomach tighten, my breath catching in my chest. I moved back to the window, unable to stop myself, and stared out at the dock. The gate swayed gently, the water was still. Nothing moved, but the tapping continued, steady and hollow, like someone was down there in the dark water, reaching up, knocking on the underside of the planks. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. And then I heard it. A whistle. 2 notes, clean and bright, floating through the trees like a melody. The kind of whistle a counselor uses to call kids back to their cabins at the end of the day. Friendly. Familiar. It came from somewhere near the cabins, but I couldn't pinpoint the direction. It seemed to move or echo or exist in multiple places at once. I felt my lips part, felt the muscle memory kick in before my brain caught up, the instinct to respond, to whistle back. It was automatic, the way you wave when someone waves at you, the way you say bless you when someone sneezes. I almost did it. I almost whistled back. My mouth was shaped for it, air filling my lungs, and then the second rule slammed into my mind like a physical blow. If you hear a whistle, do not whistle back. I clamped my mouth shut so hard my teeth clicked together. The whistle came again, closer now, just outside the lodge. 2 notes, bright and cheerful and wrong. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips, in the base of my skull. I stood in the center of the common room, surrounded by those stupid, smiling cartoon animals on the walls, and realized that I had just avoided something. Not a prank, not a coincidence, something. I don't know how long I stood there, listening to the silence, waiting for the whistle to come again. It didn't. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I checked every door, every window, making sure they were locked. I turned off the porch light. I closed the curtains, and I sat in the dark lodge alone, understanding for the first time that the rules weren't a joke. They were a lifeline. The next morning felt like waking up from a fever dream. Sunlight poured through the lodge windows, warm and ordinary, and the camp looked almost charming in the daylight. The cabins had a rustic appeal. The lake sparkled. Birds sang in the trees. I made breakfast and tried to convince myself that the night before had been my imagination running wild, stress and isolation playing tricks on my mind. I almost succeeded. Around 11, a truck pulled into the clearing, tires crunching over gravel. I looked out the window and saw a Park County Sheriff's Department vehicle, an older model with faded decals. A woman climbed out, maybe early 40s, wearing a tan uniform and a friendly expression that immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. Not because she looked dangerous, because she looked comfortable, relaxed, like this was just another boring stop on a boring day. Her name was Deputy Morgan, and she introduced herself with a firm handshake and an easy smile. She explained that she was doing a courtesy check, that Mr. Garrett had called the department to let them know someone would be staying at the camp, and that she wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. Pretty creepy spot, she said, looking around the clearing with a kind of amused nostalgia. I went here one summer when I was a kid, must have been 89, maybe 90, before they shut it down. Why'd it close? I asked. She shrugged. Enrollment dropped. Parents stopped sending kids to camps like this, too remote, I guess. Plus, there were always rumors. She grinned. You know, typical campfire stuff, ghost stories, kids disappearing, the usual. I didn't smile back. What kind of ghost stories? Oh, the kind kids make up to scare each other. Stuff about the lake, mostly. Counselors hear whistles at night, seeing extra cabins that weren't there in the morning. Standard creepy camp nonsense. She laughed and leaned against her truck. You planning to stay the whole contract period? That's the plan. Brave. I wouldn't last a week out here alone, too quiet for me. She seemed genuinely pleasant, and part of me wanted to show her the rules, to ask if she'd ever heard anything about them. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd called the rumors nonsense. Maybe it was the fear that if I said it out loud, if I admitted I was taking the rules seriously, I'd sound insane. Deputy Morgan stayed for about an hour, checking the perimeter, taking a few notes, asking basic questions about my background and Mr. Garrett's instructions. She was professional but casual, treating the whole thing like a formality. As the sun started to dip lower, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. I didn't want her here after dark. You should probably head out soon, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Gets dark fast out here. Yeah, I know. She checked her watch. I've got time. Want to walk the cabins with me? Just a quick once-over to make sure no one's been squatting. Every instinct I had screamed no. But I couldn't explain why without sounding paranoid, so I nodded and followed her down the path. The cabins looked fine in daylight. Old, neglected, but harmless. Deputy Morgan moved from one to the next, checking doors and windows, making small talk about her own kids and their summer plans. I kept my eyes on the tree line, on the lake, on the lengthening shadows. How many cabins are there? She asked, scanning the clearing. 12, I said automatically. She frowned, counting under her breath as she pointed at each structure. Huh, I count 13. My blood went cold. No, there are 12. Look for yourself. She gestured across the clearing, her finger tracing the line of cabins. 1, 2, 3. I didn't count. I didn't want to count. The third rule burned in my mind. Do not count the cabins at night. But it wasn't night yet. The sun was still up, still casting orange light through the trees. It's getting dark, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. We should go back. In a minute. Deputy Morgan counted again, faster, her frown deepening. Okay, now I'm getting 14, that's weird. Stop counting, I said. She looked at me, her expression shifting from confusion to mild concern. You okay? We need to go. Now. Before she could respond, a whistle cut through the air. 2 notes, clean and bright, coming from somewhere in the trees between us and the lodge. Deputy Morgan's head turned toward the sound. Huh. Probably a bird. It's not a bird? She looked at me like I was overreacting, and then she did the worst possible thing. She whistled back, the same 2 notes, loud and clear, echoing across the clearing. See? She said, smiling. Just... The woods answered. Not one whistle. Multiple whistles, identical in pitch and rhythm, coming from different directions at once. They layered over each other like a chorus, perfectly synchronized, too precise to be random. Deputy Morgan's smile died. Her hand moved instinctively to her belt, fingers brushing her radio. In the distance, the dining hall lights came on. One by one, window by window, the interior of the building lit up in warm yellow light, even though I knew the power had been shut off years ago. The rule screamed in my head: if the dining hall lights come on by themselves, stay in the lodge and turn off every light you can reach. We have to go, I said, grabbing her arm. She pulled away, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the dining hall. I'm going to check that out. No, you're not. Someone's in there. That's trespassing. She started walking toward the building, her hand resting on her sidearm now, her posture shifting into something official and authoritative. I followed a few steps behind, my heart pounding, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around. The dining hall was a long rectangular building with rows of windows and double doors at the front. As we got closer, I could see the lights glowing inside, steady and warm, illuminating rows of tables and benches that I knew were coated in dust. Deputy Morgan reached the door and paused, her hand on the handle. She glanced back at me. "Stay here. Don't go in there. It's my job." She turned the handle. The door wasn't locked. It opened slowly, smoothly, like someone on the other side was holding it for her. Polite, welcoming. Deputy Morgan stepped inside. The lights snapped off instantly, all at once, plunging the building into darkness. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click. I stood there, frozen, staring at the closed door, waiting for her to shout, to laugh, to come back out and tell me it was just a breaker or a prank. Nothing happened. The only sound was the faint scraping of chairs inside the dining hall, slow and rhythmic, like someone was setting the tables for dinner. I waited 5 minutes. 10. 15. Deputy Morgan didn't come back. When I finally returned to the lodge, my legs shaking, I turned off every light I could find and sat in the dark, listening to the silence, knowing I'd just watched someone walk into something they couldn't walk out of. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, staring at the windows, listening for footsteps or voices or the sound of Deputy Morgan's truck starting up. None of those things happened. The camp was silent, oppressively so. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every creak in the floorboards, every breath you take. At dawn, I went outside and I looked for her. Her truck was still parked where she'd left it, driver's side door unlocked, keys sitting on the seat. Her radio was there. Her phone was there. But Deputy Morgan was gone. The dining hall doors were closed. The windows were dark. I walked up to the building slowly, my hands trembling, and tried the handle. Locked. I peered through the dusty glass and saw nothing but tables and benches exactly as they should be. No lights, no movement, no sign anyone had been inside. I returned to the lodge and tried to call Mr. Garrett. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried the local sheriff's office, but my phone showed 1 bar of service, then none, the signal flickering in and out like something was interfering with it. I tried the radio next. Static poured from the speaker, thick and unbroken, no matter what frequency I dialed. It felt deliberate, like the camp had decided I wasn't allowed to communicate with the outside world yet. I needed answers. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I started searching the lodge. The office was a small room off the main common area, barely larger than a closet, with a metal desk and a filing cabinet against the wall. The cabinet drawers were stiff with age, and when I finally got the top one open, I found what I was looking for. Camp records, binders, folders, boxes of files labeled by year, staff rosters, attendance lists, activity schedules, medical forms, incident reports. Everything meticulously organized, the bureaucracy of summer camp preserved in fading ink and yellowed paper. I pulled out binders at random, scanning through them. 1978, 1982, 1985, 1989. The handwriting changed from year to year, but the structure remained the same. Lists of counselors' names, their assigned cabins, Tond Air certifications. Lists of campers, their ages, Tond Air emergency contacts. And then I found the gap. The binder labeled 1991 was thin, too thin. I opened it and saw that pages had been torn out. Not carelessly, but cleanly, deliberately, as if someone had removed them with a razor. The year label on the spine was scratched away, gouged with something sharp until the numbers were unreadable. I flipped through what remained, a handful of supply invoices. A memo about a broken canoe, a single photograph, loose, tucked into the back sleeve of the binder. I pulled it out carefully. The photo showed a group of counselors standing by the lake, maybe 8 or 9 of them, young adults in their late teens or early 20s. They wore matching t-shirts with Camp Pinewood staff printed across the front. They were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders, the kind of posed group shot you take at the beginning of summer. But something about the photo was wrong. Their smiles were too wide, too fixed. Their eyes were unfocused, like they were looking at something behind the camera instead of at the lens. The image had a strange quality, slightly blurred, as if it had been taken with a shaking hand. And in the corner of the frame, half hidden behind a tree, there was a line of children. They stood perfectly straight, perfectly still, their arms at their sides. They were too far away for me to see their faces clearly, but I could tell they weren't moving, not fidgeting, not talking, just standing there like mannequins arranged for display. Their faces were blurred, not by age or damage to the photograph, by motion, as if they'd been moving impossibly fast when the photo was taken, their features smearing into indistinct shapes. I stared at the photo for a long time, my skin crawling, trying to make sense of it. Then I saw the handwriting on the back. Someone had written in pencil in a shaky, hurried scrawl, "The camp needs staff. If it can't get staff, it makes staff." I set the photo down on the desk, my hands trembling. The rest of the files didn't help. There were no incident reports from that year, no names, no records of what had happened or why the camp had closed. Just gaps and scratches and silence. That night I heard them. Footsteps outside the lodge, small and quick, circling the building in a steady rhythm. Not the heavy, deliberate steps of an adult. Light, rapid, the sound of children running. Then a giggle, high-pitched, playful, delighted. I stood in the center of the common room, every light turned off, holding my breath. The giggle came again, closer now, just outside the window. Then silence. I didn't move until morning. I was beginning to understand. The threat wasn't a creature in the woods, it wasn't a monster lurking in the cabins, it was the camp itself. A place that had become soaked in routine and ritual, in the structure of summers and schedules and roles, until it couldn't let go. Until it tried to restart itself over and over, pulling in anyone who stayed too long. The camp needed counselors, it needed campers, it needed staff. And if it couldn't find them, it would make them. The supplies arrived on Thursday, just like Mr. Garrett had promised. But it wasn't a delivery truck that pulled into the clearing. It was a dented pickup with a faded blue paint job and a wooden rack in the bed. The man who climbed out moved slowly, deliberately, like someone who'd learned to measure every step. He was older, maybe mid-60s, with a weathered face and gray hair cropped short. He wore a flannel jacket despite the mild weather, and his eyes scanned the clearing with the kind of wariness you develop after seeing too much. I stepped onto the porch as he unloaded 2 boxes of supplies from the truck bed. He set them down on the gravel and looked at me directly, his expression unreadable. "You the new caretaker?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm Chris." He nodded once. "Name's Bill. I bring the supplies." We stood there for a moment, the silence stretching, and then he asked the question that made my stomach drop. "Did you whistle?" I stared at him. "What? Did you whistle back? At night when you heard it?" His voice was flat, but his eyes were sharp, watching me closely. "No," I said. "No, I didn't." Bill's shoulders relaxed just slightly, a tension releasing that I hadn't even noticed. "Good. That matters." He helped me carry the boxes into the lodge without another word, moving efficiently, his eyes flicking to the windows, to the tree line, to the cabins. When we finished, he didn't leave immediately. He stood in the doorway, looking out at the camp, his jaw tight. "Someone came by yesterday," I said. "A deputy. She went into the dining hall and didn't come back out." Bill closed his eyes briefly, like he'd been expecting this. "Morgan?" "Yeah." "Damn." He shook his head. "She always was too confident. Thought rules didn't apply to her." What happened here? I asked. What is this place? Bill turned to look at me, and for a long moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he sighed and leaned against the doorframe. I used to work for the Park Service, he said. LA long time ago. This camp was already closed by then, but I had to come out here sometimes. Check the buildings, make sure no one was squatting, same as you. I saw things, heard things, things that don't fit into a report. Like what? Like the lake, he gestured toward the water. Used to be you could swim there, fish, boat. Then something changed. Mid-80s, maybe earlier, kids started going missing. Not many, 1 or 2 a summer. Just enough that people noticed. Parents would come to pick them up, and the camp would say the kid had already been sent home early, but the parents never got a call, never saw their kid again. I felt cold despite the warmth of the day. What about the counselors? They'd quit, walk off the job mid-season, no notice, no explanation. Sometimes they'd leave notes saying they couldn't take it anymore, but no one could say what it was. Bill's voice was steady, factual, like he was reciting information from a file. The county tried to investigate, sent people out, but the records didn't match. Head counts were off, rosters were incomplete, and everyone who came back from the camp said the same thing. It felt wrong, like the place was trying to be something it wasn't. What do you mean? The camp wanted to keep running, even after it closed, even after everyone left. It had a rhythm, see? A structure. Wake-up bell, breakfast, activities, lights out. That kind of routine gets into a place when it happens long enough. And this place... He paused, choosing his words carefully. This place learned how to keep going without people. Or it learned how to make people fit the roles it needed. That doesn't make sense. No, Bill agreed, it doesn't. But sense doesn't matter here, the rules matter. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper similar to the one I'd found on the kitchen counter, but older, more worn. I wrote some of these, he said, handing them to me. Others were here before I came. We've been adding to them for years. Different caretakers, different summers, each one learned something new. I unfolded the paper and scanned the rules. Most were the same as the ones I'd already seen, but there were additional notes scrawled in the margins, warnings and observations. The dock gate is a boundary. It chooses who crosses. Whistling back is an answer. Don't answer unless you're ready to stay. The cabins exist in layers. Counting forces them into one layer. Don't make it choose. Bill pointed to one of the rules I hadn't fully understood. If you see someone you know wearing a counselor shirt, do not speak to them first. Make them speak to you and listen for what they get wrong. Why? I asked. Because it's trying to be convincing. It studies you, watches how you move, what you say, who you care about, and then it builds something that looks right. But it's not perfect. It makes mistakes, little ones. Gets a detail wrong, uses the wrong word, remembers something that never happened. If you speak first, you're giving it more information, making it better. I felt sick. Deputy Morgan, she's part of it now, Bill said quietly. I'm sorry, but once you go through that door, once you break the boundary, the camp decides if you come back. And it almost never lets people come back the same. He moved toward the door, preparing to leave, and then stopped. One more thing. If you make it through your contract, if you leave here when you're supposed to, don't think it's over. The camp doesn't just want a staff member for one season. It wants someone who'll carry the routine forward, who'll spread it. The rules aren't just for surviving here, they're for remembering what this place is when you're gone. What do you mean? Bill looked at me with something close to pity. You'll understand eventually. The camp followed me home once. Took me years to stop hearing the whistles. He climbed into his truck and drove away. the engine noise fading into the trees, leaving me alone again with the rules and the silence and the growing certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake taking this job. That night, I kept every light in the lodge turned off and sat by the window watching the cabins, counting the days until my contract ended, and wondering if Bill had ever really left this place at all. It happened on the 8th night. I was getting used to the routine, if you can call it that. Stay inside after dark. Ignore the whistles. Don't look too closely at the cabins. Keep the lodge lights off if the dining hall lights come on. I followed the rules mechanically, no longer questioning them, just executing them like a checklist designed to keep me alive. The knock came a little after midnight, soft, polite. 3 taps against the lodge's front door, hesitant and small. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking cold coffee when I heard it. My whole body went rigid, every muscle tensing at once. Then I heard the voice. "Hello?" It was a child's voice, quiet and uncertain. "Is someone there?" My heart clenched. Every instinct I had, every decent human impulse screamed at me to open the door. A child was outside, in the dark, alone. I stood up slowly, moving toward the door, my hand reaching for the lock before my brain caught up with my body. Stop. The rule about counselors came roaring back into my mind. If someone knocks and says they are a counselor, ask them which color their lanyard is, but this wasn't a counselor, this was a child. The rules hadn't prepared me for this exact scenario. "Please," the voice said, trembling now. "I'm cold. Can I come in?" I pressed my hand against the door, feeling the wood under my palm, trying to think, trying to breathe. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was a pause. Then the child answered, "My name is Sophie." Sophie. I'd seen that name in the binder, in the attendance list from one of the missing years. Sophie Brennan, age 9, checked in on July 3rd. No checkout date listed. My blood turned to ice. "Sophie," I said slowly, carefully. "How old are you?" 9. The voice was small, helpless. "I got lost. I can't find my cabin. It's dark and I'm scared." Every fiber of my being wanted to believe it, wanted to open the door and help. But I'd seen the photograph. I'd read the notes. I knew what the camp could do. "Sophie," I said, my throat tight. "What year is it?" Silence. Then after a moment too long, "It's summer." Not a year, not a date, just summer. I stepped back from the door, my hand falling away from the lock. "Please," the voice said again, and now it was crying. Real, messy, gut-wrenching sobs, the kind of crying that sounds completely, devastatingly human. "I just want to go home. I just want my mom." I closed my eyes, pressing my fists against my temples, fighting against every instinct, every moral certainty I'd ever held. This was a child. A child is crying, a child asking for help. But it wasn't a child, it couldn't be. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I can't open the door." The crying stopped. Instantly, completely. The silence that followed was worse than the crying. It stretched out thick and heavy, and I stood there in the dark lodge, my heart pounding, waiting. Then the voice came again, but it was different now. Older, calmer, like a teenager trying to mimic a child and finally giving up the performance. "You're supposed to be nicer here," it said. The words were measured, almost curious, like it was testing me, studying my response. The doorknob turned, slowly, gently. From the outside, I watched it rotate, the old brass catching the faint moonlight through the window, and realized it was testing the lock. Testing whether I'd secured it properly, testing my resolve. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The knob stopped turning, released. "You're different from the others," the voice said, still calm, still curious. "Most people open the door." I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the door, my legs shaking so badly I couldn't stand anymore. Outside, I heard footsteps, small, light, circling the lodge, not frantic, not angry, patient, like it had all the time in the world. The footsteps stopped at each window, pausing, and I imagined something outside pressing its face to the glass, peering in, learning the layout, memorizing where I was. Then the footsteps faded. I stayed there, sitting on the floor with my back against the door until the sky began to lighten, until the birds started singing and the camp returned to its daylight disguise of normalcy. When I finally stood and looked through the window, I saw small handprints on the glass, dozens of them, pressed against the outside of the lodge from every angle, like a crowd of children had surrounded the building in the night, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I understood something then, something that Bill had tried to warn me about. The camp used kindness like a trap. It used empathy, compassion, and the fundamental decency of human beings as a weapon. Because people who care, people who want to help, will open doors they should keep locked. And the camp was very, very good at finding which door to knock on. On the 11th night, the camp changed tactics. I'd survived the whistles, the open gate, the knocking. I'd resisted the urge to help, to investigate, to do any of the things a normal person would do when confronted with strangeness. The rules had kept me alive, but I was exhausted, worn down. My nerves were frayed to the point where every sound made me flinch, every shadow looked like movement. That's when it stopped trying to scare me and started trying to comfort me. It began with the smell. I was sitting in the common room, lights off, curtains drawn, when I noticed it. The air in the lodge shifted, warming in a way the old baseboard heater couldn't manage. And the smell, God, the smell, pancakes, syrup, butter, the rich, sweet scent of breakfast in the dining hall on a summer morning. I stood up slowly, my senses on high alert, knowing this was wrong but unable to stop my body from reacting. My mouth watered, my stomach clenched with hunger I'd been ignoring for days. The warmth spread through the lodge like an embrace. Then I heard it, distant but clear. Laughter. The sound of children playing bright and summery drifts through the trees like a memory made audible. Not threatening, not sinister, just happy. I moved to the window and looked out. The camp was glowing, not with electric light, with something softer, warmer, like golden hour light that never fades. The cabins looked clean, fresh, their paint bright and unchipped. The playground equipment stood straight and new. I could see shadows moving between the buildings, figures that looked like counselors and campers going about their routines. It looked alive. It looked right. Then the intercom crackled to life. The old PA system mounted on the lodge wall, dusty and dead for decades, buzzed with static. And then a voice came through, clear and cheerful and impossibly familiar. Good evening, counselors. Please report to the main lodge for head count. Repeat, all counselors to the main lodge for head count. Thank you. The voice was warm, professional, exactly what you'd expect to hear at a functioning summer camp. I stared at the intercom speaker, my pulse roaring in my ears. On the kitchen table, where nothing had been before, sat a lanyard, yellow. Brand new, the plastic still glossy, the Camp Pinewood logo printed cleanly. On the badge, my name was written on it in neat block letters, Chris Nightwatch Counselor. The camp was offering me a role. I understood immediately. The fear hadn't worked, the guilt hadn't worked. So now it was routine, structure, belonging. It was offering me a place in its system, a way to stop fighting, to stop being afraid, to just fit in. Outside, the dining hall lights came on, but not like before. This time, they didn't snap on suddenly. They warmed gradually, invitingly, like someone was inside preparing for a meal. The whistle sounded again, but it was different. Not a threat, a gentle reminder. 2 notes, friendly and familiar, calling me to join. I picked up the lanyard, feeling the weight of it in my hand, and part of me, God help me, part of me wanted to put it on, wanted to walk outside and report for head count and stop resisting. Because resisting was exhausting. Fighting was exhausting. And the camp was offering me rest. Then I looked at the rules on the kitchen counter, at the handwriting that changed halfway through, at the torn paper and the underlined warnings. The camp does not like adults who act like children. I set the lanyard down, and I started turning off lights. Every lamp, every switch, the small reading light by the couch, the kitchen overhead, the bathroom light. One by one, I moved through the lodge, plunging it into darkness, following the rule. If the dining hall lights come on by themselves, stay in the lodge and turn off every light you can reach. The warmth began to fade. The smell of pancakes soured, turning stale. Outside, the laughter stopped. I stood in the pitch-black lodge, breathing hard, waiting. Then I heard them. Footsteps, many footsteps running, circling the lodge in a coordinated pattern, light and fast, dozens of them, like a group of children playing a game. They moved in rhythm, synchronized, and then I heard the clapping. Hands clapping in time, creating a beat, a camp game I half remembered. From childhood, the kind where you chase someone and they're it, and everyone runs in a circle laughing, playing until someone is caught. The footsteps got faster, the clapping Lois Uder, and then a voice close to the window whispered with perfect clarity, "You're late." Not angry, not threatening, just stating a fact. I was late for head count, late for my role, late for the routine the camp had prepared for me. I pressed myself against the wall, my hands over my mouth to keep from making a sound, and listened to the camp trying to integrate me, to assign me, to make me part of its endless, terrible summer. The footsteps circled until dawn. The clapping never stopped. And when the sun finally rose and the sounds faded, I found the lanyard still sitting on the table, waiting patiently, as if the camp knew I'd change my mind eventually. It happened on the 13th night. I saw Deputy Morgan again. I was standing at the lodge window in the dark, something I'd started doing out of compulsion rather than purpose, when I noticed movement near the lake. A figure standing by the water's edge, silhouetted against the moonlight. My heart lurched. It was her. I recognized the shape, the posture, the way she stood with her weight on one leg. Deputy Morgan, exactly as I'd last seen her before she walked into the dining hall. She was standing next to the dock gate, which was open. If it is open after dark, do not close it. I watched her from the window, my breath fogging the glass, trying to decide if what I was seeing was real. She moved slowly like someone exhausted, and then she turned toward the lodge. Even from this distance, I could see her raise her hand, waving, calling me. I couldn't hear her voice, but I saw her mouth moving, forming words. Help me. Every rule I'd learned told me not to go, told me to stay inside, to wait for morning, to let whatever was happening run its course. But this was different. This wasn't a whistle or this, a stranger or something pretending to be a child. This was someone I'd met, someone I'd talked to, someone who'd walked into danger because she didn't believe the rules mattered. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside before I could talk myself out of it. The night air was cold and still. My footsteps crunched on the gravel path as I moved toward the lake, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I kept walking. "Morgan!" I called out. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer. She just stood there by the open gate, facing the water now, her back to me. I got closer, close enough to see details. She was wearing her uniform, but it looked wrong somehow. Too clean, too pressed, like it had been washed and ironed by someone who'd never worn a uniform before and didn't understand how they should look after a day of work. "Morgan," I said again, softer now. "Can you hear me?" She turned slowly and I saw her face in the moonlight. It was her, and it wasn't. The features were right, the shape of her jaw, the color of her hair, the lines around her eyes, but her expression was empty. Flat, like a mask that had learned to hold a shape but not an emotion. "I got out," she said, her voice distant and mechanical. "I just need help." She took a step backward toward the dock, and I realized she was moving like someone was pulling her, not dragging, guiding, leading her gently toward the water. "What happened in the dining hall?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I can't remember." She took another step back. "It keeps asking me to count. It won't stop until I finish. Do not count the cabins at night." "Don't count," I said quickly. "Morgan, listen to me. Don't finish counting." "I have to," she said, her voice breaking just slightly, a crack in the performance. "It's part of the routine. I have to count before head count. That's the rule." "That's not the rule. The rule is—" I stopped, because I heard it, under the dock, that soft, rhythmic tapping again, like knuckles rapping against wood from underneath the water. Tap, tap, tap. I looked down and saw movement between the planks, pale shapes shifting in the darkness below. Hands reaching up, fingers tapping, 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 keeping time like a metronome. Morgan took another step backward, and now she was standing on the dock itself, right at the edge where the gate hung open. If it is open after dark, do not close it. The rule didn't say anything about crossing it, but Bill's words came back to me. The dock gate is a boundary. It chooses who crosses. "Morgan," I said, my voice steady now, forcing myself to think clearly. "Tell me something. Something only you would know. From when we talked yesterday." She tilted her head, her eyes unfocused. "We talked about my kids. About summer plans. What are their names?" She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't... What are your kids' names, Morgan?" Her face twitched like something underneath was struggling to hold the shape. "Emily and... She couldn't finish. Because whoever made this version of Deputy Morgan had only heard her mention her kids in passing. Hadn't heard their names. Hadn't learned that detail yet. "You're not her," I said quietly. The thing wearing Morgan's face stared at me, and slowly, impossibly, it smiled. The smile was too wide, stretching further than a human mouth should stretch, revealing too many teeth. "You would have been a great counselor," it said in a voice that was no longer Morgan's at all. It was layered, multiple voices speaking in unison, children and adults blended together. Then it stepped backward off the dock and into the water. There was no splash. It sank smoothly, vertically, like it was being pulled down by invisible hands. The water closed over its head without a ripple, and then it was gone. I stood there, shaking, staring at the dark water, and realized I'd just passed a test. The camp had tried to use guilt, empathy, need to save someone. It had built a perfect trap, and I'd almost walked into it. But I'd asked the right question. I'd listened for what it got wrong. I backed away from the dock slowly, keeping my eyes on the water, and didn't turn my back until I was inside the lodge with the door locked behind me. That night I added a new line to the rules, writing it carefully at the bottom of the page. "The camp will use people you know. Make them prove they're real. Always make them prove it." Bill arrived the next morning with my final supply delivery and the news I'd been waiting for. "Contract's almost up," he said, setting the boxes inside the lodge. 3 more days and you're done." I couldn't speak. Relief hit me so hard I had to sit down. Bill looked at me carefully, his eyes scanning my face, checking for something. "You holding up?" I'm still here, I said. That's more than most people manage. He glanced around the lodge at the notes I'd added to the rules, at the windows I'd stopped opening, at the lights I kept permanently off. You learned? I followed the rules. Good. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and set it on the table. When you leave, you need to leave certain things behind. The keys, that binder you found, the lanyard, if it gave you one. Anything that feels like it belongs to the camp. Don't take it with you, understand? I nodded. And one more thing. Bill's expression darkened. After you leave, you might hear things, see things. The camp doesn't like letting people go. It'll test you for a while, see if you remember the rules, see if you'll come back. What kind of things? Whistles, familiar voices, people you know acting just slightly wrong. He met my eyes. If it happens, you don't engage. You don't whistle back. You don't answer questions you shouldn't have to answer. You remember what you learned here, and you keep remembering until it stops. How long does it take to stop? Bill was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll let you know when it does. 3 days later, I packed my car with the few personal items I'd brought, left the keys on the kitchen counter, and drove away from Camp Pinewood. In my rearview mirror, I watched the camp shrink and disappear into the trees, looking exactly as it had when I'd arrived. Abandoned, quiet, ordinary. I believed I'd survived. I believed I was free. For 2 weeks, I was right. I went back to the city, back to my apartment, back to my normal life. I slept in my own bed. I ate at restaurants. I walked through crowds of people and felt the relief of being surrounded by noise and light and humanity. And then, one afternoon, I was walking through a city park near my apartment when I heard it. 2 notes, clean and bright, a whistle. I stopped walking, my whole body going cold. It was the same whistle, the same pitch, the exact same rhythm. Not close, but not distant either. Somewhere in the park, carried on the wind. I turned slowly, scanning the crowd. Families on picnic blankets, joggers on the path, a group of teenagers playing frisbee, everything normal. And then I saw the child. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Rue was running past me with a bright yellow lanyard swinging from her neck. She glanced back at me as she ran and she smiled. The smile held too long. Her eyes were unfocused, looking at something behind me instead of at me. She ran toward the playground where a group of other children were gathered, and I noticed they were all wearing lanyards. Yellow, clean, new. I felt my stomach drop. One of the children turned toward me and waved, cheerful and friendly, and I saw the words printed on their shirt. Camp Pinewood Staff. I didn't wave back. I turned and walked away, forcing myself not to run, keeping my breathing steady, following the rules even though I was miles away from the camp. Do not whistle back. Do not engage. Listen for what they get wrong. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. Thank you for your service. The camp appreciated your professionalism. We'll be in touch about next summer. I blocked the number. But 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the lodge at Camp Pinewood. The door was open, and standing in the doorway, facing the camera, was me. I was wearing a yellow lanyard. I was smiling. I don't remember that photograph being taken. I never wore the lanyard. I never stood in that doorway. But the camp had decided I was part of the staff now. And the camp always needs staff. I still hear the whistles sometimes late at night when the city is quiet. I see children with yellow lanyards in grocery stores, on subway platforms, in coffee shops. They smile at me, and I don't smile back. Bill was right. The camp followed me home. And I'm starting to understand that it didn't just want me for one season. It wanted me to carry the routine forward, to spread the rules, to teach others how to survive, which means teaching others that the camp exists, that it's real, that it's waiting. I'm writing this down because someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what Camp Pinewood is and what it does. The rules aren't just for surviving the camp, they're for surviving after the camp. Because some summers never end. They just wait for you to forget the rules long enough to let them in.